For years, victims spoke. For years, the world ignored them. When he finally faced justice, he died behind bars. But the question remains, did Jeffrey Epstein really act alone, or was he just the face of something much bigger? The story of Jeffrey Epstein begins in an ordinary place, far from the mansions and private islands that would later define his name. Born on January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, Epstein grew up in a modest home in the Coney Island neighborhood. His father, Seymour Epstein, worked for the city's parks department. His mother, Pauline, was a school aide. By most accounts, Epstein's childhood was unremarkable. He was intelligent, good with numbers, and confident beyond his years. After graduating from Lafayette High School, he attended Cooper Union and later the Current Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York University, but never obtained a degree. Still, his mathematical ability was undeniable. In the mid-1970s, he began teaching calculus and physics at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's elite private institutions. It was an unusual position for someone without a degree, but Epstein's charisma and intellect impressed the headmaster, Donald Barr, a connection that would later prove haunting, as Barr was the father of William Barr, who decades later would serve as U.S. Attorney General during the final years of Epstein's life. At Dalton, Epstein taught children of New York's elite, bankers, lawyers, and business executives. Among those connections was Alan Ace Greenberg, chairman of Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful investment banks. Greenberg was impressed by Epstein's intellect and hired him in 1976 as an assistant trader. It was here that Epstein began his ascent from modest origins into the world of immense wealth and influence. At Bear Stearns, Epstein's official title was junior assistant to a floor trader, but he quickly climbed the ranks. He became known for his boldness and unorthodox style. Within a few years, he was promoted to a limited partner, an extraordinary rise for someone without a college degree or traditional Wall Street background. Colleagues described him as confident and secretive, someone who seemed to know how to handle clients with large sums of money, and who often operated on his own rules. However, Epstein's time at Bear Stearns ended abruptly in 1981. The official reason given was a policy violation, but the details were never publicly disclosed. According to some accounts, he had engaged in an unauthorized loan deal involving a client. Whatever the reason, Epstein left the firm but kept many of his wealthy contacts. It was this moment that marked the beginning of his private financial empire. In the early 1980s, Epstein founded his own company, J. Epstein & Co., with the stated purpose of managing the financial affairs of clients with at least $1 billion in assets. Unlike most wealth management firms, Epstein was secretive about his clients. He insisted that he only worked for a small number of ultra-rich individuals, handling everything from tax strategies to investments, and he charged extraordinary fees for his services. One of his earliest and most significant clients was Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret and other retail giants. Wexner would become central to Epstein's rise. By the late 1980s, Epstein had become Wexner's financial advisor and effectively the manager of his fortune. Wexner trusted him deeply, even granting Epstein power of attorney, a legal right that allowed him to make financial and property decisions on Wexner's behalf. Through Wexner, Epstein gained control of lavish properties, including a Manhattan mansion on East 71st Street, one of the largest private residences in New York City. It was during this period that Epstein began cultivating a reputation as a mysterious financier with ties to the rich and powerful. His social circle expanded to include high-ranking politicians, scientists, royalty, and business magnates. He threw lavish parties at his New York mansion and later at his estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Guests included figures such as Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Britain's Prince Andrew. To many, Epstein appeared to be a man of limitless resources and unparalleled connections, but few understood where his money truly came from. By the early 2000s, cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed image. In 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department received a report from a parent whose 14-year-old daughter claimed she had been paid to give Epstein a massage at his mansion, where he allegedly sexually assaulted her. Detective Joseph Reckery and Police Chief Michael Ryder launched an extensive investigation. What they discovered shocked them. a pattern of abuse involving dozens of underage girls who were recruited by other young women to visit Epstein's home, often under the guise of providing massages for cash. Over the next year, the investigation uncovered testimony, physical evidence, and consistent accounts suggesting Epstein had maintained a network that lured minors into sexual encounters. Chief Reiter later described it as a sexual pyramid scheme. The local police recommended multiple felony charges, but when the case was handed over to federal authorities, the tone changed dramatically. In 2007, Epstein's legal team, comprising some of the most powerful attorneys in the country, including Alan Dershowitz and Kenneth Starr, entered into negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. The U.S. Attorney at the time was Alexander Acosta. After months of back and forth, a controversial non-prosecution agreement was reached. Under its terms, Epstein would plead guilty to 2 state charges: procuring a minor for prostitution and soliciting prostitution. In exchange, he would avoid federal prosecution and potential decades in prison. The agreement also granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators, an extraordinary clause that effectively shielded others who might have been involved. Epstein served 13 months in a Palm Beach County jail, but his confinement was far from typical. Under a work release program, he was allowed to leave the jail 6 days a week, 12 hours a day to work at his office. His cell door was reportedly left unlocked, and he was often transported by private driver. The leniency of the sentence drew public outrage once details emerged. Many of Epstein's victims felt betrayed. The Miami Herald's investigative journalist Julie K. Brown would later expose the full extent of the 2008 plea deal in a landmark series published in 2018. Her reporting reignited public scrutiny and ultimately contributed to new federal charges a decade later. After his release, Epstein attempted to re-enter high society, but his reputation was tarnished. Still, his wealth and connections allowed him to maintain an aura of protection. He continued to host elite guests at his various properties: the New York Mansion, his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James, a ranch in New Mexico, and apartments in Paris. His staff and associates described a world of strict secrecy and control. Employees were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements and follow detailed protocols when dealing with Epstein or his guests. In 2019, the past finally caught up with him. On July 6th, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport, New Jersey, after returning from Paris. The charges, filed by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, allege that Epstein had sexually exploited dozens of minors between 2002 and 2005, recruiting and abusing them at his residences in Manhattan and Palm Beach. The indictment accused him of maintaining a network of recruiters who arranged for victims to be paid in cash for massages that turned into sexual acts. Authorities seized large quantities of evidence from his mansion, including thousands of photographs of young women and what appeared to be records of financial transactions. In his safe, investigators also found passports under false names, stacks of cash, and diamonds, items that raised questions about his travel, identity, and potential plans to flee prosecution. The arrest sent shockwaves across the world. Prominent individuals who had once associated with Epstein, business leaders, scientists, and politicians, rushed to distance themselves. Former President Bill Clinton issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, stating that his interactions with Epstein had been limited to philanthropic events. Prince Andrew faced growing scrutiny over his friendship with Epstein, and photographs surfaced showing him in Epstein's homes and with one of the women who later accused Epstein of abuse. Donald Trump, who had known Epstein socially in the 1990s, told reporters that they had fallen out years prior. Epstein pleaded not guilty, but he was denied bail after prosecutors argued that his wealth, international connections, and history made him a significant flight risk. He was placed in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York City, a high-security federal facility. At the time, public attention on the case reached a fever pitch. Many wondered what Epstein might reveal in court, what he knew about the powerful figures who had once surrounded him, and whether he might cooperate with investigators. The U.S. Attorney, Jeffrey Berman, stated that the investigation was ongoing and that anyone who helped Epstein would be held accountable. Then on the morning of August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The official ruling was suicide by hanging. His death came just weeks after a previous incident in which he had been found injured in his cell, leading authorities to place him temporarily on suicide watch. Yet at the time of his death, he had been removed from that watch and left without a cellmate. The two guards assigned to monitor him reportedly fell asleep and later falsified records to show they had checked on him. The sudden death of one of the most high-profile prisoners in America ignited an immediate storm of suspicion, outrage, and conspiracy theories. Attorney General William Barr stated that he was appalled by the failure of MCC to ensure Epstein's safety and announced an internal investigation. The FBI and the Department of Justice's Inspector General both launched inquiries into the circumstances. Epstein's death left behind more questions than answers. What information might he have revealed in court? Who were the co-conspirators protected by the 2008 plea deal? How had such a powerful network remained hidden for so long? His death also led to renewed attention on his longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of British media mogul Robert Maxwell. In July 2020, she was arrested and charged with multiple counts of trafficking and conspiracy related to Epstein's crimes. In 2021, she was found guilty on 5 federal charges, including sex trafficking of a minor, and later sentenced to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors alleged that Maxwell helped Epstein recruit and groom young girls, acting as both accomplice and facilitator. Through these proceedings, a clearer picture of Epstein's operations emerged. Victims testified about the network of abuse, the recruitment process, and the culture of fear that surrounded Epstein's properties. The court documents, witness statements, and financial records showed a pattern of control, secrecy, and manipulation that had been allowed to thrive for decades, often shielded by money, influence, and legal power. Even after his death, Epstein's estate became the focus of civil lawsuits from dozens of survivors seeking justice. His properties were sold off to create a victims' compensation fund, which ultimately paid out hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements. Yet, despite those efforts, many of the larger questions remain unanswered. How he built his fortune, who else was complicit, and what secrets he took to the grave. By the end of 2019, the name Jeffrey Epstein had become synonymous with the intersection of power, privilege, and abuse. The story revealed how influence could protect a man for years, even when the evidence was overwhelming, and how the systems designed to ensure justice could fail when confronted by wealth and connections. As investigators continued to uncover layers of financial and social networks tied to Epstein, one reality became clear: the full truth about how he operated and who enabled him might never be known. His life, and especially his death, left a void filled by suspicion, doubt, and a lingering question. How could someone accused of so much, connected to so many, remain untouchable for so long? When Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell on August 10, 2019, the world's attention shifted overnight from the crimes he was accused of to the circumstances surrounding his death. The official ruling, suicide by hanging, was accepted by the medical examiner, but few accepted it without question. The situation at the Metropolitan Correctional Center was chaotic. The cameras outside Epstein's cell reportedly malfunctioned, the guards had fallen asleep, and logs were falsified to indicate regular checks that never happened. Attorney General William Barr called it a series of serious irregularities and promised a full investigation. For many, however, the timing felt almost impossible to believe. Epstein's death came only days after thousands of pages of court documents were unsealed, revealing names, flight logs, and allegations implicating high-profile individuals. The documents included sworn testimony from Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers. She had first come forward years earlier, claiming that she had been recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell as a teenager and forced to perform sexual acts for Epstein and his associates. The unsealed records provided a glimpse into the network that had operated around Epstein for years: private jets, offshore accounts, and an ecosystem of enablers who protected him from scrutiny. As the news spread globally, public reaction was divided between outrage and disbelief. Hashtags like "Now Epstein didn't kill himself" trended across social media platforms, reflecting widespread suspicion that Epstein's death had silenced potential revelations about others in power. Across the political spectrum, From activists to journalists, the demand was the same: accountability. Within weeks, two of the correctional officers on duty that night, Michael Thomas and Tova Knoll, were charged with falsifying records. Prosecutors alleged they had neglected their duties for hours, browsing the internet and falling asleep instead of monitoring the inmate. Both officers later admitted to falsifying the logs, but avoided prison time through plea deals that required community service. The Metropolitan Correctional Center itself was eventually closed in 2021 due to unsafe and deteriorating conditions, a move that highlighted years of neglect in one of the nation's most notorious federal facilities. As law enforcement continued to piece together Epstein's network, focus turned toward his estate. With an estimated net worth of over $500 million, his assets were scattered across properties, trusts, and shell companies. In 2020, a court-appointed administrator established the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, designed to provide restitution to survivors. Over 225 claimants came forward, and by 2021, more than $125 million had been distributed. The fund was financed through the liquidation of Epstein's assets, including his Manhattan townhouse, the Palm Beach mansion, and the private islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands. But money was never the only question. Investigators wanted to understand the structure behind Epstein's wealth. His financial firm, J. Epstein & Comers, had virtually no public filings, clients, or products. Apart from his early association with Leslie Wexner, there was little evidence of legitimate financial operations on the scale Epstein claimed. Court documents revealed a labyrinth of offshore accounts, foundations, and holding companies, many registered in jurisdictions with strict secrecy laws. In 2020, the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General, Denise George, filed a civil lawsuit against Epstein's estate, accusing it of operating as a criminal enterprise. The suit alleged that Epstein had used his private island, Little St. James, as a base for human trafficking, transporting victims and associates by private jet. Investigators seized flight logs and security records that offered a partial picture of Epstein's movements. While many names appeared, business people, scientists, entertainers, authorities were careful to note that inclusion in flight logs did not imply criminal involvement. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest on July 2, 2020, marked the next major development. For years after Epstein's death, she had remained out of public sight, reportedly moving between secluded properties. When FBI agents finally located her at a remote estate in New Hampshire, they described the operation as carefully planned. Maxwell had used fake names, security guards, and electronic counter-surveillance measures to avoid detection. Her indictment included charges of enticement of minors, sex trafficking, and perjury. The prosecution's case centered on her role in recruiting, grooming, and abusing young women alongside Epstein. During her 2021 trial, held in federal court in Manhattan, prosecutors presented testimonies from several victims who described Maxwell as both an accomplice and a manipulator. She was accused of normalizing Epstein's abuse, sometimes participating herself, and creating an environment where young girls were made to feel that what was happening was acceptable or even normal. Maxwell's defense argued that she was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes and that the prosecution was motivated by public anger rather than evidence. However, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found her guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. During sentencing, she maintained her innocence but acknowledged the pain of Epstein's victims, saying, "I empathize with all the victims in this case." The conviction brought a sense of closure to some survivors, though many emphasized that Maxwell's trial had barely scratched the surface. "It's not just about Epstein and Maxwell," said Virginia Giuffre in an interview. "It's about a system that protected them." Beyond the criminal cases, the aftermath of Epstein's death triggered broader investigations into how institutions had failed to stop him. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a review of the 2008 plea deal in Florida. Former U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta testified before Congress, defending the decision as the best outcome possible given the circumstances. His explanation, that federal prosecutors believed state charges would secure some measure of justice while ensuring Epstein registered as a sex offender, did little to calm criticism. The deal, negotiated in secret without informing victims, was widely condemned as a miscarriage of justice. The FBI and federal prosecutors in New York continued their efforts to identify others who may have participated in or benefited from Epstein's network. Subpoenas were issued, bank records examined, and hundreds of interviews conducted. Yet as of 2025, no additional high-profile individuals have been charged in connection with Epstein's crimes. Legal experts point to the challenge of evidence lost over time, expired statutes of limitation, and the death of the central figure. Still, the impact of the Epstein scandal reached far beyond the courtroom. It prompted renewed scrutiny of how wealth and influence can distort justice. The case became a touchstone in discussions about corruption, sexual abuse, and accountability among the elite. Documentaries, news investigations, and government hearings sought to understand not only what Epstein did, but how he was able to do it for so long. Among the most critical findings was the role of social networks in shielding him. Epstein was known to donate to universities, scientific foundations, and political campaigns. He cultivated relationships with figures in academia, including Harvard professors and prominent scientists. Through philanthropy and charm, he positioned himself as a patron of intellectual progress. Harvard University later acknowledged receiving over $9 million in donations from Epstein and pledged to redirect those funds to support victims of sexual abuse. In 2019, MIT's Media Lab faced its own reckoning when reports surfaced that Epstein had continued to make donations to the lab even after his 2008 conviction. The director, Joy Ito, resigned amid revelations that Epstein had helped secure additional donations from wealthy associates. The scandal forced institutions worldwide to examine how easily moral lines could be blurred when money and prestige were involved. Epstein's story also exposed the mechanics of social power. He offered what others craved: access, introductions, influence. To some, he was a financier. To others, a fixer who could open doors that remained closed to most. For decades, his charm and wealth disarmed suspicion. His private jets and island retreats became symbols not of luxury, but of secrecy, places where the rules did not seem to apply. The FBI's investigation into Epstein's associates remains technically open. Prosecutors have repeatedly stated that the investigation is ongoing. Yet without Epstein himself, many experts believe the full scope of his activities may never be revealed. His digital archives, including computers and hard drives seized from his properties, have not been publicly disclosed. Federal authorities have confirmed their existence but not their contents. Meanwhile, survivors have continued to push for transparency. Civil suits have targeted both Epstein's estate and organizations that allegedly enabled his behavior. Banks like J.P. Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank have faced lawsuits accusing them of facilitating transactions that helped sustain Epstein's trafficking operation. In 2023, J.P. Morgan agreed to pay $290 million to settle claims with victims, while Deutsche Bank paid $75 million in a separate case. Both banks denied wrongdoing but acknowledged that Epstein's accounts should have received closer scrutiny. As the years pass, Epstein's legacy remains a paradox, both a symbol of impunity and a warning. His rise from a Brooklyn classroom to the center of global power revealed the fragility of systems built on trust and privilege. Even after his crimes were exposed, his death left behind the same unanswered question that haunted investigators from the start. Who else knew? In interviews, former associates have described a man obsessed with control. Epstein kept detailed logs of visitors, recorded conversations, and maintained archives of photographs and documents. Some who knew him believed these records were his form of insurance, a way to ensure that his powerful friends would protect him. None of these materials have ever been made fully public. The few who were allowed into his inner circle often described a carefully curated world. Staff members were given strict orders: avoid eye contact, speak only when spoken to, and never discuss what they saw. Security cameras lined his estates, and records showed that staff turnover was high. Those who left signed binding non-disclosure agreements. His pilots later testified that they had flown dozens of passengers, including celebrities and political figures, but denied witnessing any illegal activity directly. After Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction, Further legal battles emerged. One involved Prince Andrew, Duke of York, who was accused in a civil suit by Virginia Giuffre of sexual assault when she was 17. In 2022, the case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, with Andrew denying all wrongdoing. The settlement included no admission of guilt but effectively ended his public royal duties. Other associates, including lawyers, business partners, and former assistants, were questioned by the FBI. Most denied knowledge of Epstein's criminal behavior, though several expressed regret for ignoring warning signs. In 2020, one of his former house managers, Juan Alessi, testified that Epstein's homes operated like a hotel for the powerful, with visitors arriving day and night. For survivors, the fight for justice continues. Many have used their experiences to advocate for legal reforms. They pushed for changes to statutes of limitations for sexual abuse, leading to new legislation in states like New York and Florida that expanded victims' ability to seek civil damages. Their testimony reshaped public understanding of how abuse can persist in environments of wealth and privilege. The cultural impact of the Epstein case also reshaped how media covers powerful figures accused of misconduct. Journalists began re-examining long-ignored stories, and institutions introduced new transparency policies regarding donations and affiliations. The case inspired documentaries, podcasts, and books that sought to separate fact from fiction, always circling the same truth: power can hide darkness in plain sight. By 2025, nearly 6 years after Epstein's death, the physical remnants of his empire have been dismantled. His Manhattan mansion has been sold, his island properties auctioned off, and his name erased from countless foundations and institutions. But the story remains unresolved in the public imagination. The Epstein saga is not just the account of one man's crimes. It is the story of how systems designed to enforce justice can be bent by wealth and influence. It's a reminder that privilege, unchecked, can create its own form of immunity. And though Epstein's life ended behind bars, the shadows of his network still stretch across corridors of power. In the final analysis, Jeffrey Epstein's story stands as one of the most disturbing cautionary tales of modern history. It exposed the vulnerabilities of institutions that valued money and connections above morality. It revealed how victims were silenced for decades while those in power looked away, and it forced a reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that justice for some arrives too late. His death closed one chapter, but it did not end the story. Investigations continue, lawsuits remain active, and survivors still seek the full truth. For them, the question is not only what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, but what the world allowed to happen because of him. As one survivor said in a courtroom years later, "Epstein is gone, but the system that protected him is still here. Until that changes, the story isn't over." Jeffrey Epstein is gone, but the questions he left behind are still alive. Who protected him? Who silenced him? And how many secrets died with him? If you think this story is over, it's only just begun. Subscribe the channel Real Story Hub for the next untold truth.